For the past few months, it feels like every XRP conversation has revolved around one thing: the Clarity Act. Every time there's a delay, the community gets frustrated. Every time there's a new update, social media fills up with people saying, "This is it. This is the moment everything changes." But here's the question I keep seeing in the comments. And honestly, I think it's the one we should be talking about. What if the Clarity Act doesn't pass anytime soon? Does that automatically mean XRP can't succeed? It's a fair question, especially if you've been holding XRP for years. A lot of investors are simply tired of waiting. They've watched deadlines come and go, they've seen positive headlines followed by disappointing price action, and naturally they're starting to wonder if too much hope has been placed on one piece of legislation. So today, instead of asking when the Clarity Act will pass, I want to ask something much more important. Does XRP actually need it to succeed? Before anyone misunderstands me, let me be clear. Regulatory clarity is a good thing. Clear rules give businesses more confidence, reduce uncertainty, and make it easier for large financial institutions to participate. Nobody's arguing against that. But I also think some people have started treating the Clarity Act as if it's the only thing standing between XRP and success. And that's where I think we need to slow down and look at the bigger picture. Because here's something worth thinking about. Ripple didn't suddenly appear this year. The company has spent years building partnerships, expanding into international markets, developing payment technology, and working with financial institutions across different parts of the world. None of those efforts started because of the Clarity Act, and none of them stopped simply because the bill hasn't passed yet. That's an important distinction. The United States is obviously one of the most influential financial markets in the world. There's no denying that. If lawmakers provide clearer rules for digital assets, it could remove uncertainty for many businesses operating in the US, and that would likely be a positive development. But Ripple isn't a company that only operates inside the United States. Its business strategy has always been global. That's why I think the real conversation isn't whether the Clarity Act is important. The real question is how important is it compared to everything else that's already happening? Because if Ripple continues expanding internationally, continues signing partnerships, and continues building infrastructure regardless of what happens in Washington, then maybe we've been focusing on only one piece of a much larger puzzle. And I think that's exactly where so many investors get stuck. Every headline becomes about one bill. Every discussion becomes about one vote. Every delay feels like the entire XRP story has been pushed back. But is that actually true? Or are we confusing one potential catalyst with the entire long-term investment thesis? So let's answer the question that really matters. If XRP doesn't completely depend on the Clarity Act, then what role does the Clarity Act actually play? I think this is where a lot of the confusion starts. Some people talk about the bill as if the day it's signed into law, banks will immediately start buying XRP, institutions will flood into the market, and the price will skyrocket overnight. That's probably not how the real world works. Major financial institutions don't make billion-dollar decisions because of one headline. They move through long planning cycles. Before they commit capital or adopt new technology, they evaluate regulations, risk, compliance, infrastructure, and how that technology fits into their existing systems. That's why regulatory clarity matters, not because it magically creates adoption, but because it removes uncertainty. Think about it like building a highway. The Clarity Act isn't the car, it isn't the driver, and it isn't the destination, it's the road. A better road allows more traffic to move safely and efficiently, but the cars still have to decide where they're going. That's exactly how I see this legislation. It has the potential to make it easier for companies to operate in the US, encourage innovation, and give institutions greater confidence. Those are meaningful benefits. But Ripple isn't sitting in a parking lot waiting for someone to build that road. The company has continued moving forward. Over the past several years, Ripple has expanded into markets where clearer regulatory frameworks already exist. It has continued developing payment solutions, working with financial institutions, and growing its global presence instead of waiting for Washington to make a decision. That's why I think it's important to separate Ripple's business from US legislation. They're connected, but they're not the same thing. Another point I keep seeing in the comments is this. If the Clarity Act gets delayed again, does that mean XRP investors should panic? Personally, I don't think panic is ever a good investment strategy. A delayed bill doesn't automatically change Ripple's technology. It doesn't erase existing partnerships. It doesn't suddenly make cross-border payments less valuable. And it doesn't stop financial institutions around the world from continuing to explore blockchain solutions. What it does mean is that US regulatory certainty may take longer than many investors hoped. That's disappointing, but disappointment and failure are two very different things. I also think social media has unintentionally created unrealistic expectations. Every deadline gets treated like a countdown to a massive price explosion. Then, when the deadline passes without fireworks, investors feel like something has gone terribly wrong. The reality is that legislation is rarely fast. Politics rarely moves on the timeline investors want, and markets rarely reward patience immediately. That's frustrating, especially if you've been holding XRP for years. But frustration doesn't necessarily mean the long-term thesis has changed. It simply means progress is taking longer than expected. So maybe the better question isn't, will the Clarity Act save XRP? Maybe it's this. Is Ripple continuing to build a stronger business while the regulatory picture slowly improves? Because if the answer to that question is yes, then the story becomes much bigger than one bill or one vote. So after looking at the bigger picture, I think we can come to a much more balanced conclusion. Can XRP succeed without the Clarity Act? I believe the answer is yes, but with an important clarification. Succeeding without the Clarity Act doesn't mean the legislation isn't valuable. It absolutely is. Clear rules give businesses confidence. They reduce legal uncertainty, encourage investment, and make it easier for financial institutions to build long-term strategies. If the Clarity Act eventually becomes law, I think it could remove one of the biggest questions hanging over the US crypto industry. But here's what I don't believe. I don't believe XRP's entire future depends on one vote in Washington. If we've learned anything over the past few years, it's that Ripple hasn't spent its time sitting around waiting for politicians. While headlines focused on lawsuits and legislation, the company continued building products, expanding internationally, working with financial institutions, and positioning itself in markets that already have clearer regulatory frameworks. That's why I think investors should be careful not to confuse a catalyst with the foundation. The Clarity Act could absolutely be a catalyst, but Ripple's business, its technology, and its global strategy are the foundation, and those are two very different things. One thing I've noticed from reading so many comments lately is that people are simply exhausted. Some have been holding XRP for 5, 6, even 7 years. Every few months there's another deadline, another prediction, another promise that this is the moment. When it doesn't happen, disappointment turns into frustration, and eventually frustration turns into doubt. Honestly, that's understandable, but investing based only on deadlines can be dangerous because markets don't follow our calendars. They move when adoption, liquidity, regulation, and demand all begin lining up together, and nobody can tell you the exact day that happens. So instead of asking every week, did the Clarity Act pass yet? Maybe the better questions are, is Ripple still expanding? Are more institutions exploring digital assets? Is blockchain adoption continuing around the world? Is the overall regulatory environment improving? Those are trends, and long-term trends usually matter far more than short-term headlines. Whether you're bullish on XRP or still skeptical, I think we can all agree on one thing. The next chapter for digital assets won't be decided by social media predictions. It will be decided by real-world adoption, real utility, and whether companies continue solving real financial problems. That's what I'll be watching, and I think that's what every long-term investor should be watching too. So let me leave you with one final question. If the Clarity Act takes another 6 months, or even another year, but Ripple keeps expanding globally during that time, would that change your confidence in XRP or strengthen it? I'd genuinely like to hear your thoughts, so let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want XRP videos that focus on facts, logic, and the questions the community is actually asking, not unrealistic hype, be sure to like this video, subscribe to OG John XRP Insights, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next XRP analysis. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.